Beloved extraordinaires, thank you so much for seeking me out again. If you are a returning extraordinaire, welcome back. And if this is your first time, then a really big heartfelt welcome to you. Thanks for being here. It's so nice to be back in the studio. We've been out of the game for a number of weeks. My hashtag hot husband, Will Travail, and I went down like a sack of potatoes with COVID-19 for most of the month of July. And we're really just now clawing our way back into real life. Grateful to have not been hospitalized, sending love to anybody whose family or friends or self might be. Feel free to reach out and message me if you have any questions about what it's like to have COVID or what it's like to heal from it. If we can share our experience with you and have it help you in any way, we're totally here for you. A little interesting fact that I wanted to share with you is that all of our symptoms are gone now, like 24 days later, albeit but like a little touch of lethargy. We're pretty much back to normal. But both of us are still testing positive for coronavirus. Positive. What the F? The CDC guidelines tell us that we're well past the stage of being contagious. Great. But it's really very strange and quite disheartening to know that this virus still is in our bodies somewhere. I'd like it gone. I know I have no doubt all of us would like COVID gone from our lives. What havoc it's wreaked upon humanity. At least we're all in it together, right? That's a small detail that seems to make my heart shine just a little more for some reason, being part of a common experience that's shared with all the people of the planet. In truth, we have so many common experiences that have just become the way that it is, the normal. Climate change is normal. Poison plastics, the extinction of our beautiful animal species, white supremacy. All of us have all of this stuff in common, and I wish that we could all feel as, motivated to eradicate these sad realities like we do the damn coronavirus. What would be the vaccine for these evils, do you think? I wish I knew. Is it just education and action? I don't know. Asking questions and communicating is maybe a good start, in my opinion. And that's what we're doing on today's show, about the white privilege aspect, at least. It's quite a strange world we're navigating these days. Devastating wildfires, COVID-19, George Floyd, gosh, all this awful tragedy. And yet in the wake of that, we see an uprising, a revolution, an outcry, and what to me feels like a beautiful coming together of people of all colours and all creeds, all races around the globe, standing up for or against our common enemy, which is hate, which is racism, which is oppression by the governments and their police and the patriarchy. Rude words, all of those things, rude words, all of them. My utopian default setting feels like we're starting to see some light coming through the cracks. Do you think that too? I mean, let's let all the light in, right? Let's fling open every door and take a good look in every dusty corner and carry the shame and the silence out into the light. That's got to be cathartic. It's a bit of a dream of mine to hope to one day see a future for all of us, for a united race, the united human race, working together, finding ways to challenge a broken system, to break apart old paradigms, beliefs, and clarify mistruths, heal old wounds, and work together to end systematic racism, to end long-time oppression of the Black, brown, immigrant, and minority communities, to feed each other, take care of each other like a tribe. What a world that would be, sharing the earth's bounty equally among us. It's pretty frou-frou, way too frou-frou for you. But is that possible, do you think? If you say that it's not possible at all, then why? Why do you say that? Do you not think humanity is capable of doing something like that? How sad. Of coming together, do you think we could do it? It is a massive ask, I know. But gee, I'd like to think we could be better together. I just wanted to say that out loud, I guess. Okay, so maybe that idea of utopia is out of the realm of global possibility, but there's nothing to say that I can't ask some questions and do some digging that could perhaps help create some of those equalities in my own life, right? If that's what I want, that's what I've been investigating lately. And I confess there is so much that I didn't know. Turns out I'm really white. I did not know the sordid histories, many of them, or the depths of the oppression that's been going on in this country for so long, or even in my own country. And the truths and the injustices that I did see and did know exist, I got to admit, I was just too scared or too indoctrinated to ever really question it or take a deeper look. It's been a bit of a shock to me, a reckoning to think that I thought I was one of the good guys. I have a love for every living being on earth. I think every human being is extraordinary. I have no issue with any race, creed, or color. I really do want to be friends with everyone. People's stories fascinate me, hence this podcast. But I do see now that that's not enough. In the past, I really haven't taken much action to learn about or change or defend injustice or discrimination or oppression. I mean, in tiny ways I have maybe, but now is not the time to be afraid to call a spade, right? The stakes are high. The time is now. And I think our authentic truth and vulnerability matters more than ever. What if it is my lack of knowledge on these subjects? What if that's what makes me just as effective and just as much a part of the problem as most every other white privileged person on the planet? Maybe it's what we don't know that perpetuates the problems. What if that makes me ignorant? Oh God, super cringe. But if that's true, which I'm pretty sure it is, then I've got to change that. And most of the time, I don't know where to look to find the answers to the questions that I never even knew I had the possibility to ask, right? What I do know is that I want to be a better human and a better ally to all people. I want to know more. I want to do better. I want to be able to make a difference. I want to stand up for my fellow man. I want to be an anti-racist ally. I want to talk about the uncomfortable things with people of color. People who maybe I never knew how to engage with before because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I want to be accountable and learn how I can leverage my power and my white privilege to help people. I'd love to be the change I wish to see in the world. Thank you, Gandhi. So if that sounds like a call to action for you, wicked, because I have a wonderful woman to talk to about all of this with today. This is what she does. This is her job. FLEUR LARSEN is a facilitator. She travels the nation and the world educating individuals and corporations like Amazon and Boeing, even people at the ACLU and people like me, how to be accountable for our white privilege. She teaches workshops and hosts events talking about equity, social justice, martyrdom, racism, sexism, internalized sexism, white privilege, white supremacy, patriarchy. She knows her stuff and she blows people's minds. And she creates or helps to create pathways to the kinds of change and understanding I'm talking about. And she's a super cool woman.
FLEUR LARSEN, thank you so much for being here today. I can't wait to speak to you and learn about some of your wisdom. Hi.
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here.
What is it, in your words, that you actually do?
Well, I got my start in the work that I'm doing now 20 years ago doing facilitation. So I'm really clear that my art and craft is around facilitation, around facilitating groups of people. And then I've been able to map it with my values of social justice and liberation. Those are a lot of buzzwords. What that really means is I'm clear at the heart of my work, it's about how humans interact with other humans in the
Mm.
context of power and privilege, which is always happening. Power and privilege is always operating. We might call it different things. It's kind of like what's happening in the space between us and then in the systems that are holding us all together.
I mean, in every breath they exist, right?
Yeah. Yes.
For
Absolutely.
all of us.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why did you get involved in this? What drove you to want to make these kinds of changes for people like me?
Let's see, that's a great question. I think, you know, my why is really connected to my own experiences around sexism. You said patriarchy many times in the intro. The patriarchy is all encompassing, it's all around us. I'm clear that, you know, my liberation is wrapped up in your liberation. And
Yeah.
that is true for all of us. And this piece of seeing like what's in it for me, like what my why is, and what's at stake for me if I do or don't engage, really connects to my own humanity, right? And my own unlearning and healing from, and then getting closer and more expansiveness with my own humanity.
So how do you even start this path? So you had that idea, you had that experience, then you had that idea, and then you went, this is what I want to do with my life? And
No,
so
was not that clear or glamorous or anything like that. No,
it never is that easy, is it?
Right,
It just never
right.
is.
No, I had finished grad school and then was like, okay, I'm gonna go get a job, and then I couldn't find a job, or I, you know, found one, but it was like me pre-grad school, and my background's in youth work, youth development and education. So I was trying to move away from direct service, and really wanting to think a little bit more bigger picture, go upstream, have a bigger impact instead of just more one-on-one. I worked at a school, you know, I worked with young people in lots of different capacities, and, you know, loved that. Was great. And I knew I was like, okay, one-on-one connections are where everything is at and where this all starts, but I'm wanting to like go big picture. Excuse me, no, I wasn't getting the job that I wanted. And then I was in a training as a participant, and the sign on the wall read, "What are you pretending not to know?"
What a great question.
That's a good question. And part of the training was the sign literally got bigger each day, like this looming sign.
What pink elephant?
Yeah. And, you know, for the woman next to me, she's like, I gotta divorce my husband, right? Like that's where it landed for her. And for me, all things were professional world, because I was coming out of grad school, and I was like, oh, I know the work I want to do. I'm just kind of scared. I don't know exactly what form it's going to take, or, you know, how I'm going to exactly do it. But I was clear that I have this art and craft of facilitation, of working with people and groups of people, and wanting to map it with my values of social justice. And so then after that, I went in with that this is what I'm going to try to launch to do. It took me about a year of like figuring it out, you know, doing other random work. And really was, you know, I piloted a workshop called The Privilege to Work for Pennies, how martyrdom undermines equity, because coming from nonprofits and education, where I worked overtime for free all the time, right? Like there was no such thing as overtime pay. You work until you're done, and you're never done, because it's a setup, because young people need lots and lots and lots, and, you know, things like that. But I really saw the relationship that when I worked overtime for free, instead of advocating for a bigger budget, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what I mean by go upstream. Like, wait a minute, I can, and that there was actually kind of some ego in the martyrdom of like, oh, it's about me, help this young person. And as I had been like unlearning that for myself, I was like, oh, this is a correlation to equity, because who has the privilege to kind of martyr themselves around, and even in thinking, you know, here I'll place it in, you know, context. Here in Seattle, we have a lot of folks who are in the nonprofit sector, and a lot of them, I don't have exact data, this is just my anecdotal experiences, are white women whose husbands subsidize their work, essentially.
Yeah, okay.
Like Amazon, Starbucks, Microsoft. And so who can afford to do this work? Who can afford to do mission-driven work where you feel good about yourself and you know you're helping people? And so this relationship to how martyrdom was actually undermining my bigger vision around like equity and equality. And it's similar to, I don't know if you're familiar with this program called AmeriCorps, right? Like It's similar to Peace Corps, but AmeriCorps, so U.S. version based, right? And
I
so
see.
it's about like go in and work at an underfunded school, but you're paid pennies, and so who can afford to do that? Well, middle class white kids can afford to not actually make a good wage at a college or something like that. So there's
Because
this.
they're supported, right?
That's right. Yeah, because they have a safety net, or they, know, oh, this is temporary, then I'll go get my better paying job later, so there's an interesting kind of relationship there. And that was a part of my own personal journey. So anyway, that's the training I was kind of piloting my first year, and I did it for free for a bunch of different folks so I could like refine my content. And it was also my learning process because I was moving away from direct service. I consider myself a recovering bleeding heart, having worked with young people in crisis residential centers and foster care youth, and martyred myself and felt really good about it and was like, I'm doing good work in the world. But then was like, wait a minute, there's something funny about this, about my own motivation. I had to get kind of honest with myself.
Yeah. And so I totally get that. And I'm sure so many people do. Like, it seems like your suffering needs to be part of it in order for it to be effective.
Sure. There's many ways to kind of spin that there. And so I think, moving away from that, really wanting to see how my story and my people, so I work with a lot of white women, and that's the dominant group in education, in nonprofits, and in healthcare. And so just started to look at the data, which is interesting and compelling in those arenas. The helping professions is what they're, historically been referred to as.
Yeah.
And so there's something about that, like why are there so many white women in my group? And there is a relationship between sexism and white privilege, right? Being on the recipient end of sexism and patriarchy, but then also having white privilege. There's this funny tension there. And that's what I really wanted to like kind of learn more about and understand for myself. And that's what I mean by like me unraveling my relationship to martyrdom, as if my value on the planet was based on how helpful I am.
Yep, I get that.
Right?
Yep,
Like,
that's me.
Yeah, it's many of us. It's
totally.
It's the Protestant work ethic, right? Your salvation is dependent on how selfless you are. And our version of it, is my value. It comes from being helpful. And even the word help.
Yes.
Start to, with that thing when you're like, I want to buy a yellow car, and then you see yellow cars everywhere. So with helping, I started to be like, I'm hearing it everywhere. All these white women I knew in my circles were saying, I just want to help, here to help, I'm happy to help. It wasn't support, collaborate, lead, brainstorm. It was just specifically that word.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there was a lot of pieces coming into place. And then as I was doing that and building lots of relationship with folks, and I'll kind of fast forward now to explain some things. It's a funny thing in some ways to be a white woman doing racial equity work. So I'm really clear on like accountability. And I wasn't at first. I was like, well, I'm just a person. Like, organizations might be accountable or things like that. And like, it's a buzzword that's talked about a lot. Like, how do you do accountability? What does that mean? What does it mean to be an ally? How do you do it? You can't really dub yourself ally. I can't give myself that title. So this piece of like really anchoring everything into relationship. And really building relationships with folks that my colleagues of color that's who I think about, or that's how I think about accountability. It's about a feedback loop that's anchored in a real relationship. And so then I started to evolve my work to be more explicitly racial equity. As I was being called forward, they were saying, please do this work because I'm able to work with large groups of people and specifically to work with my people, white women who were a dominant group in a lot of the nonprofit clients that we had.
And so let's just concentrate on that then for now, because of course that's that's what I'm mostly interested in, so I can evolve a little bit. And so what did you find? What was the glaring obstacles that you found that someone like me had with trying to figure out how to be an ally?
Sure. Yeah. I think the key thing is even you said it in your intro a little bit. So all humans have bias, right? Like neuroscience, thank you. It kind of like leveled that, like, and unfortunately we're in a little bit of a binary but I'm a good person, so therefore I must not have bias, right? And so just kind of the honesty of like, I have bias, I also have implicit bias, which means my brain is thinking things I don't even know what they are. You're like, what am I supposed to do with that? Because we are good people who have bias, right? Like, so both are true. And there's truths with this thing of like holding, okay, I am a good person who has bias, and that's the starting place. Because if we can't name that, then it's really hard to manage for something you can't name.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, you've got to get really clear and honest, right?
Yeah, that's right. You know, and this piece of all of it, no one escaped it. You know, you said the term white supremacy earlier, like no one escaped this, the air we're breathing in. When there were all the fires here in Washington 2 summers ago or I think, you know, Idaho, Montana, there were all these fires, like it was like thick. You could see it's like the smog in LA, right? No one's escaping it. No one's not breathing it in. And so we all got it. And for white folks, you know, kind of this internalized racial superiority. And so this piece of like, okay, it's there and I'm a good person. So we get to hold both, right?
Yep.
And
great. That's a relief, right? I find that relieving.
Yeah, because I think so much people get nervous but you're going to think I'm a bad person.
Sure. Yeah, if we can all just agree that that is inherent in every single human being, then we've got a great launch pad. Okay, brilliant, great, check.
Right. And I think the number one thing I hear from white folks is, I just don't want to say the wrong thing, right?
I find that, especially coming from Australia, like there's taboo words here that we have no concept would have the effect when we say them. Like I got myself into some pretty sticky situations when I first arrived. It was mortifying.
Yeah, right. Because then, and so then we get to look at making mistakes gracefully, right? Oh,
yep.
Feedback, good to know. But all these feelings come up, either defensiveness or humiliation, but like, intent versus impact. But I'm a good person. Don't think I'm bad. So again, holding nuance of, we're good people. We got given some weird information about how we, being white folks, how to treat other humans on the planet. And what this process is right now, whether you call it social justice or, anti-racism, is about the unlearning, right? The unlearning of all the air we breathed in that was smog, right? Of white supremacy, of just, oppression or oppressive norms in general, right?
Yeah.
And so that thing of just kind of being honest that like, all right, I've got some racial bias. What is it? Where does it show up? It usually shows up in like all the wrong places at just the wrong moment where you really don't want it to. And then we get to like, just, really have some grace and humility with ourselves. And the best thing to do in that, if something comes up or something happens, is just to name it and own it and clean it up, like just really concisely.
Can you give us an example of how that, like what most of your people and your students, like what's the number one example?
I think probably most folks I know, and myself included, just at the interpersonal level, like I don't want whoever I'm talking to think I'm a bad person. There's all the bigger mistakes. I think of racism as that was a mistake, right? There's policy mistakes, there's systemic, there's big picture stuff. But when folks are nervous, it really comes up at the like, this person's looking at me and I'm terrified they think I'm a bad person. And so if you get given some feedback about here's the impact of your actions you maybe didn't know or whatever, it's really
by asking the person, like by reading their reaction and going, did I offend you? Is that what you're saying? It's a communication?
Yeah, if they tell you. I mean, that's a great point, because communication is always happening, right? Like
whether you're saying things or not. Yeah.
And so part of this is picking up on it. Feeling up on what's going on right now. And part of privilege is the privilege to not know that there's something happening. Right.
The stuff you don't know, you didn't know.
That's right. You don't. Yeah. And that's what bias is. They're like, I keep doing this. They're like blinders. Bias is like blinders. And so we don't have the sense. And so the unlearning of, there's something happening. And you said it, earlier as well, this piece of like, there's a lot going on and some of us are just awakening to it. And why didn't we know? Like something set us up to not know, and we can attribute it to privilege, right?
So you have to make a conscious effort to learn it first, like see it, observe it,
right,
and then understand how to unlearn it. So what are those steps? Like, and I want to, can I use an example? Like, so, we have a friend. I have one black friend who likes to be called black, and another friend who doesn't like to be called black. They like to be called African American. And so trying to find personal preference, you know, like how do I navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, folks of color, BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous folks are not a monolith, so it really is customized. So us increasing our capacity to learn and especially either lead with what's your preference, ask, or they'll tell you and then gracefully accept the feedback. Oh, great, good to know. Thank you. Right, as opposed to, oh, you know, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, you know, like blah, 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 whatever.
All that crap. Yep, got it.
Yeah, it is similar to like getting feedback about anything.
Yes, of course.
Right. So one thing, what I mean when I said earlier by like, I get my humanity back is when I aim myself at racial equity, I get to skill up around getting feedback, you know, and that will help all parts of my life, right? Not just when it's about racial equity. It's like, oh, what a gift of something that like my whole person will improve from. It's sort of like when you shine the light using racial equity, it shines the light on like all the things that are not working or all the areas that need some tending to. And a big one is conflict. When I work with organizations, the ability to engage in healthy conflict really correlates to being able to advance racial equity.
Healthy conflict. So in the workplace, people coming up against like oppression or not being given the same opportunity because of the color of their skin, and there's conflict around that.
Conflict in general, right? Like just like blanket statement. An organization's ability to engage in any healthy conflict, which I, for myself, didn't grow up with that there was such thing as healthy conflict. They weren't, it's like those were never put together, right?
Yeah.
Right. I grew up in Seattle, passive aggressive, conflict adverse area.
I know passive aggressive.
Yeah. And so, you know, you don't talk about it and anything is conflict is bad. And so this thing of skilling up again around healthy conflict about anything. And if you can do that, it will support you advancing racial equity. So because racial equity is a pretty high charge topic, so you need to be able to use these skills in all areas, especially when it's not as high charge or like people's lives aren't at stake. And so you want to be able to do it anywhere, let alone with like, racial equity.
So at the workplace, you're saying, I have sometimes these big topics for me, and the big words are too hard for me to decipher what my path is if I was in that situation. And so are you saying that, you know, if you're in, I'm sure it would be important if you're in these corporate situations where the conflict is coming up, but it's our responsibility to also encourage perhaps the person of color to have a platform to speak and to share their part, right? We have a responsibility to not only speak our own truth, but encourage others to have a space to do that too, so that they can come forward, all the topic.
I would say yes, and it depends.
And it depends, okay.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, what's so tricky is all of this it's so contextual. It's so about the relationship. Whenever I'm confused about race, I map it. I look to, well, what do I know is true about my experiences of sexism, right? And are there times when, like, of course, I would want to be able to say my piece, and I might enlist male allies. Like, I'm tired. I've been saying the same thing over and over, and you're not hearing me. So I'm going to enlist my male ally. And it also might make me mad that people will hear him, right? He might say the same message, but he's going to be heard. And, you know, that's this tricky thing about utilizing your allies. Like, we need to call on our allies, and it has to be anchored in relationship, right? Because otherwise, sometimes with white folks, we can kind of try to swoop in and save the day, and it's our white savior stuff or our protectionism, and it's weird. It gets weird, right? And like you said with your two friends, we might not know until we're able to read the room, which means skilling up around feedback, like, you know, and usually it's all the nonverbals or whatever. And this is very much at the interpersonal level. You know, there's all this stuff. We have to think about this at the policy level and systemic arena as well, around who's given a voice, who's given a platform, who's not, who's in the room, who's here, who's not here, who's designing policy, right, and why people aren't here. And really, like, not tokenizing, which is another one. So you can be like, wow, I can't do anything. But it is nuanced. And that's partly what we get better at as white folks who are putting ourselves at racial equity, is seeing seeing the nuance, right? And that each moment or each situation is going to be unique.
So how do you teach that then? How do you teach when is the necessary time for you to stand up and defend, or stand up and make space? Like how do you teach it?
Well, unfortunately, there's like not a foolproof like plan. Here, implement these.
It's not just step 1, step 2, step 3. Here you go.
Yeah. So bare minimum, it's trial and error. Right?
Okay.
It's trial and error, and then it's like, okay, did I have a relationship? Who did I have relationships with in the room? What's the quality of them? Was I connected to myself? Like, I like, and so the somatics of this, and this is the us healing, and where everyone has been harmed by white supremacy culture, is the disconnection where we're like, I don't even know what's, I wasn't present, right? And so for white folks, one key strategy is drop in, connect to your body.
Yeah.
Drop in, connect, breathe.
How does it feel?
Yeah, and feel, right? And our bodies usually can kind of pick up on stuff even before our minds are super conscious of it. So trusting, drop in, connect, and trust. And one of the biggest things is you don't have to try to say it right, but anything is better than nothing, and that's the trial and error part of it all.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. So just communicate, connect, converse.
That's right.
Try and learn about someone else's story, someone else's feelings, share your truth, admit your vulnerability, admit your unsurety of how to say it. Yeah, I get that. Just speak it. Just connect and communicate. Okay. All right. Okay. You teach so many different workshops, right? You teach, and they all connect. At some point, they all converge into each other. But how does as you were saying before, like you had to learn about the sexism and martyrdom, and which is what sent you on this pathway. Like, what is that about? How does sexism affect me and then reveal itself to be social injustice or white supremacy? How does it connect?
Yeah, what's the link there? Yeah, great question. I think me understanding my experiences of oppression, and there's, we all have multiple different identities, whether it's, also around class and gender and religion. So there's many intersections there. I think about sexism because it's been so big. It's such a massive institution, and affects so many of us. I mean, it affects everyone. It affects men in the sense of like toxic masculinity and things like that. Yeah. So, well, I'll tell you what the outward expression is, and kind of like the work backwards from that of what I see and what I found in myself that I had to work on and get real like, ooh, I'm doing that, is where the impacts of sexism and the ways I've coped, those coping ways are actually getting in the way of me being a good ally to my colleagues of color.
Okay.
So the helping. Yeah. Stick with that because it's really clear, the helping and getting my worth from feeling helpful instead of going for a relationship.
Even with self
and with my colleagues of color, right? Yep. And so even that subtle distinction, what might come from is matters. Because then my thinking is either I'm dropped in and connected, or I want to be seen as a good white person. I want to be seen. I want to be helpful. I want you to like me. Like all those kind of motivators of wanting to be helpful from the impacts of sexism are getting in the way of me actually being powerful, being bold, being reliable, being an authentic ally, striving for racial justice, right?
You have to stand up for yourself and your worth first. To understand how to make space for others.
Yeah, and how disappointing and devastating it is if I don't meet allyship, because I know what that's like to not have it, not be on the receiving end, or to be on the receiving end of someone else not delivering it to me, right?
I understand. Yeah, that's so important. I don't think we even realize, it's so, it's in the system from the time that we're, little girls.
That's right.
Turning teenagers, that happens.
It's super ingrained. And I want to be really clear because it can get kind of confusing. And, what's tricky is we don't want to syntax and words really matter. And we don't want to like, I don't want to harp on anyone for, saying the wrong thing. This is what I'm suggesting is not about white feminism, because white feminism has been incredibly harmful to our sisters of color, right? Like white women got the right to vote in 1920, not all women, things like that.
Yep.
Right? And
Yep.
then second and third wave feminism. So a key strategy I see for me and for you to advance racial equity is I got to go heal from the impacts of sexism so that I can really show up in a more powerful and bold way. And it's not, oh, I'm going to go heal and work myself to make myself perfect so I can come back fixed. It's not that either.
Yep.
We want to, because it can get kind of slippery in there of like, what's this about?
Yep.
And our own insecurities can kind of take something and then like take it somewhere else. And it's like, no. We just need to go heal from the impacts of sexism.
Yes.
So we can then really, really show up more powerfully in our quest to be allies to our colleagues and friends of color.
And so then once we get to that point where we have the connection with our allies and our friends who are people of color, then we can get to move forward together and kind of tackle this, supremacy situation, right? It's kind of, that's the onion layer.
Yeah, and I think, this key thing of like following their lead, what do folks want, really humility and throwing yourself under the bus, or like, being humble, but not a doormat. Right?
Yep.
Like I'm clear that I'm like smart. I bring my full critical thinking to my partnerships when, my colleagues and I are working with a client, and I'm going to follow their lead on some stuff. Right. And whatever they think we should be doing with our client around the racial equity work. But I'm not like martyring myself. I'm not being a doormat. I'm not shrinking to elevate them. I'm really like truly in relationship. But I'm clear that like I'm going to follow their lead, right? Once you know your power, it's really easy to share power.
Yes. And do you find that you have like remarkable breakthroughs when you're talking about this stuff with corporations? Like, is there real change that happens, or I mean, how do you then get all the way to the top and then deconstruct it to construct it better?
I think a critical mass is needed, right? Like individuals might have an aha, and we're talking about culture change, and so we need critical mass, and folks with power, whether you're white folks or you're men or your positional power, really you need to look at being willing to like change, like actual change.
Yep.
Which might on the onset have a perception that you're going to lose out.
Yes.
Like that's the perception. And so that's where we go back to in the very, very beginning when I said my liberation is wrapped up in your liberation. Like
that's right.
It's a win-win if we aim ourselves at this, right? It's a win-win. Like, there's so many great small examples like the, like carving out on sidewalks the space for a wheelchair, right? Like ramp, right? Yeah. So people with disability justice had to fight really, really hard to make that be a thing, like ADA accessibility stuff. Turns out, who else does it benefit? People with, canes, or like if you have a stroller, or like it benefits a lot of people.
And we don't even notice it. I don't need it, but I certainly don't notice it's taken away some of my sidewalk.
Yeah, right. That's right. And so, but they had to fight really hard to make that happen. It wasn't just a done deal. And so while that's a pretty small example, that is what we're talking about when we go for equity or liberation, or justice. Like these are human rights issues, and, it's politicized now in a way that is quite polarizing when we're really just talking about caring for people.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because like you say, it has been quite, quite loud when you hear people discussing how reticent they are to share, to suddenly be able to, offer people of color more of what they should have been getting from the very beginning, which is they'll let redlining, they should be able to get loans, and it goes down the board. Like, what do you say to people who are afraid that they think that they're losing out, when really the perception in my mind is that if you could get over it, we're all winning, we're all creating more abundance? Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the heart of that is we're not operating with all the same information, right? About history, about
Okay. Yes.
like redlining. You mentioned that, but not everyone knows about redlining or the implications of it, 50 years
course.
later, and who can accumulate wealth. So that's one thing I start off with all my clients is, baseline information. I'm not a historian. There's tons of brilliance out there, and I want to uplift like folks of color who have written books on this, or movies or shows or whatever. A podcast called Seeing White is phenomenal. Goes through history. There's 1619, and then of course there's a lot of different books.
So much around at the moment, which has been really highlighted currently, which is lovely.
Absolutely. So having some sort of elevated baseline of shared information, shared analysis, and shared language. People use the term equity and equality interchangeably all the time, but they actually mean fundamentally different things.
Oh, can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So equality, we all get the same. Everyone gets a cookie. Everyone gets one cookie, right? That's equality, equal.
Yeah.
That part's simple. Equity is who hasn't eaten recently? Who needs this cookie, right? And if someone comes in with like their own bag of cookies, they don't need it. Let's give it to the person that doesn't have any.
Got you.
It's more about need. It's about thinking about context, right? We want to think about historical context, current context, right? Equality is everyone gets the same. Doesn't matter what you're dealing with or what's happening, right? There's a great image around if you equity and equality in the bicycle, right? Like if we give everyone a bicycle, well, I'm really short. Looks like your sweetie's really tall. We don't need the same bike.
Yeah.
If I give him my bike, it's not going to help him. So, and also like, what if you're differently able? So the equity slide shows the bike that fits the person. What is the need? It matches what the need is, not just we all get the same bicycle, because that actually doesn't benefit everybody.
And is that why you think people are a bit scared of it, because they think people will get more?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a perception there. And when you're accustomed to privilege, right?
Yeah, having plenty.
Yeah, having plenty, and you don't know that like it's privilege. You just think it's your normal.
Yes,
right?
yes.
This is just what's normal. And then when we suggest equity or even just equality, you think you're being attacked or on the losing end because you're accustomed to something that you didn't even know was a thing.
Right. I mean, people get really pissy in Australia about, because we have the dole, we have, what do you call it here, unemployment, but people don't like having to spend their money to take care of other people. In Australia, we have national health care, which is a freaking godsend. It should be here. But I think Americans, if I may, really scared of, supporting someone else for fear that they won't have enough.
Yeah. There's just so much misinformation, and people are operating from really different normals, the context, like geography wise.
Of course.
Here in Seattle, people, if they watched Fox News, they would think that anarchists are taking over our city last month.
That's right. That's right.
So then, it's like really messing us up to have now, like, what is real? Like, that's a fundamental like breakdown in a functioning society of what is real, what just happened, what is reality, what is happening. This is why it's really scary. And having more shared information, shared analysis, shared language, those are strategies to make our way through. Right.
So investigating, multicultural literature or, even movies or television or something that tells their own narrative is part of the education of understanding someone else's story, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. It's good advice. Yeah. I mean, I interviewed one of my my Black friends who's a native Los Angelian, and it's remarkable that how much she's been learning that's come forward recently, information that's never taught in schools. I don't know, half the stuff that's going on with our Indigenous people, it's not taught in our schools either. And would you that's what you're saying, that the education and not understanding the histories, not that that's what you teach, but that's part of the origin of why we're having so much problem now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There's two sayings, and one I'll uplift from Toni Morrison's is definitions are written by the definers, not the
like the Bible.
Don't get me
You
started.
might not like that.
Yeah.
I know. Oh,
Jesus was
geez.
an Arab Jew. Like, and he's not
Exactly.
otherwise. Jesus was an Arab
There's just some facts that you can't deny, but yet we fight and kill each other over the lie.
Well, and then literally the whitewashing of that narrative, right?
Yes.
So Toni Morrison, this quote, definitions are written by the definers,
Yeah.
not the defined, which is similar to history is written by the victors.
Yes, of course.
Right. So who's dictating the norms? Who's telling the story, the narrative?
So that right there is white supremacy, isn't it?
Yes.
That's an example of how we are all under the thumb of deceit.
Yeah, absolutely. Who does it benefit? Who does, when we really narrow the narrative or define the narrative in a certain way, who's benefiting?
So you're teaching things at the independent level, an authentic responsibility and accountability by individuals, and then expanding it to corporations and the like. And so that's the only possible way, because how the hell are we supposed to transform that?
Yeah.
How do we do that? That's like way big.
Yeah, it is. One thing that's hopeful, because there's so much that can be overwhelming and like feeling hopeless, right? And
yes,
heartbreaking, is one thing that's hopeful to me is just similar to like labor movement organizing, is the build your base, the one-on-one, and the critical resistance, like getting a critical mass of people to do anything. And what we're seeing right now is if a lot of us do something, actually a lot is quite possible, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of all of these protests, peaceful protests that are right, our constitutional right, they are making huge changes. They really are forcing the hand of things that were just kind of going about that no one noticed. And here in Seattle, just keep my examples local here, we were building a youth jail, and people have been doing movement work around organizing around, let's not put money into jailing kids, let's put money into like preventing them from getting into jail, right? Where you put your money is what you value.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah, it's like if you want to hit the tree, if you don't want to hit the tree when you're driving your car, don't look at the freaking tree.
Yeah, that's so simple, but like people make it really complicated. And this thing of if enough people, and I do want to honor that, like people have been doing movement work and organizing for a long time to be able for this moment to even happen, right? It didn't just, it's like, yes, COVID, and yes, people are at home, maybe potentially working from home. And so our relationship to time and access to leaving and going to a protest is different. Of course. And it was like ripe because of all the movement work people have been doing for years and years and years, like organizing.
Very much so.
Yeah, having, so we need to honor that, and mostly done by Black and brown folks, right? And so having
absolutely.
Around like in Portland, I don't know if you saw like the naked woman sitting on the street and like stopping and then the fathers with the leaf blowers and the mothers making arms. Those are great, and they're just now showing up now. And organizing has been happening by Black and brown folks the whole time. And so we have to be careful in how we sensationalize who is getting the attention.
I understand.
This moment.
You're saying because all those examples that you just made were white people basically getting on the bandwagon to assist, and we're making news stories about them going, hey, yay. Yeah. Whereas it's been movement for generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so just, even that, we want to be careful in how we sensationalize, or again, who's telling the narrative, who's controlling the narrative.
Right. So where you get your news from, where you learn. So we still have to come back to grassroots. So my family, my friends, generationally, there's still words that I use that are straight up racist, and they're just colloquialisms that are bandied about in regular conversation. So how that to me seems like one way that we can start to get really authentic with how, because you might not be racist at all, and yet the words you use are so ingrained in your vocabulary, right? How do we cut that, right? That's important.
The biggest things is like, so we even have to go, we all have bias. ergo racial bias, which means I
Uh-huh.
am racist.
Everybody is what you're saying. Everyone has.
All white folks, and that's what I mean by no one escaped it. And so it's like, oh,
It's true. I think
yeah.
it's true.
And
Damn it.
you know, you just practice it, take it on. Oh, darn it! Set my best effort. I actually am racist, and I'm doing my best to unlearn it.
I have walked down the road. This is, it's horrible to say, but I mean, you know, I've walked down the road and, you know, especially when I first got here, held a purse closer to you if you're being met by, you know, 5 people who don't look like you, especially if they're men.
Yeah, right. You know, and this thing of just identifying.
Stereotyping.
Yeah, and just being honest, like, oh, that thought, like, because that's
that thing.
How we unlearn the implicit bias that's like lodged in there. And I actually find neuroscience to be, and neuroplasticity to be so hopeful. We can,
yes.
Our brains can.
Of course we can. And so what do you do in that situation? How do I, as the example to use, how would I unlearn that?
Well, first, awareness. Oh, I just did that.
I just felt that or thought that.
And then all the feelings that come with that. Oh, surprise, shame, guilt, embarrassment, fear. And, you know, feelings, there's nothing to do but feel them.
Yes.
They have to be felt, and usually talk about it, write about it, whatever, try to unravel like what happened there.
Yeah.
Is the start, right? And it's true for anything, any human experience. Like we have to actually fully experience it and be honest about it.
And then I've been saying, hi, how are you?
Right.
I'm actually engaging.
Right.
That's like, I've done that a couple of times and I felt that come up, you know, instead of me like skulking away, I'm like, hi guys, how are you?
Right.
You know, which seems to transform, like, oh, I'm great, you know. Which is one way.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, right. You know, and I think that thing you mentioned about words, right? And we have to just kind of also this piece around learning and humility of like, oh, that's inappropriate, or that actually has been harmful. Here's the history of that word. Here's why. And then you know, right?
So Google it immediately in the moment and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm calling myself out.
Right. Yeah. Just like know what, you know, and same thing with others, your friends, you know, you mentioned like, you know, folks back home in Australia or something like that, and just giving in a anchored in relationship, hey, I wanted to give you some information. I just learned this too. Turns out that's not the awesomest thing to say anymore.
Right.
And people's willingness to learn in public, to be wrong. And so humility, right? Humility is like a core emotional intelligence skill that we get to skill up around humility. And turns out, of course, that'll help us in lots of areas of our life.
Yeah.
And that goes, again, that's what's in it for me as a human.
So shame and guilt is useless. Get rid of it and find the empowerment, like you were saying, just to believe in your worth and your value, to state your truth authentically in the moment and connect.
Well, and that you have worth even if you say the wrong thing and then you learn from it, right?
That's worthy. That's a beautiful moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just true for all humans. Like we're, you know, people make it's like make mistakes gracefully. Right?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
How do we have these conversations, even though we might not be, you know, perfect or nail it, maybe even sometimes in a lifetime, but how do we have these conversations and skill up, as the term that you used, our immediate family, the people who are around us? How do we inspire evolution and new cognition in those people? How do you do that?
Yeah. Okay. We'll say that family is a whole other category. It really
it's a whole other workshop.
It's a whole other category.
Okay.
I think a couple things. One, practice in lower stakes areas, right? People that are
like taking out garbage.
Or like someone that you already think similarly, or you already have some shared analysis. Practice, you know, how you might not, maybe it's literally how you might talk to someone else, but just sort of like, don't take the hardest relationship or the highest risk relationship and start there, right? Like don't.
Because that's martyrdom.
Or just, you know, I mean, like any new skill, it's not going to necessarily go very well, right? Like we're learning, we're practicing. And that's, again, the nuance and the context, right? And really being able to, in a split second or a few seconds, our minds are brilliant. We can think on our feet, but it takes practice.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And then I think, you know, trying to change people's minds, we all can sniff that out you're like, someone's coming at us, right? Like trying to convince us of something. That's usually
No
not,
one likes that.
that's not going to be a good strategy. It is
Yeah.
for me to be in a right relationship with myself to say what I think. So sometimes people will be like, I can't ever change their mind. Why bother? I'm not going to say anything.
Oh.
And what happens in that moment is then I've compromised my own integrity.
Yep. Exactly.
So you can say something that's just more about like, well, here's what I believe. Sounds like we think differently.
Right.
And you also might be in that moment, whether this is written, like Facebook is a big classic one, or, you're in a group of people with your family, other people hear what you think and they know where you stand, right? And that's actually really, that's really important, right? And it doesn't have to be about calling someone out or humiliating them, but that like we can like disagree. James Baldwin's quote that's phenomenal is, we can agree to disagree unless your disagreement is about denying my humanity.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Right. So that's not
totally
exactly his quote. We should get it precisely. But that thing of like, we can't actually just agree to disagree about racism not being a thing. Because it's a thing.
Yeah,
and
totally.
People are dying, and we can't agree to disagree about Black Lives Matter. And
right.
All lives matter, but I think Black Lives Matter. Like that's a big divergence. And so some type of like, we can't just leave it there, right?
So what are the questions that I should be asking myself that I might not be?
Are you talking with other white folks about racism?
Very much lately, yes.
Right. I think that's one of the biggest things. I take my cues from my colleagues of color, where Jodi Embury, who I just did a workshop with on last week, where she coined this term called secret allies, where she would work somewhere and something off would be said, and someone would Slack channel her, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. I'm so, a white person, and she's a Black woman. I'm so sorry that happened. That was terrible. And she's like, why didn't you say anything? Don't back channel about how terrible it was and be my secret ally.
Yes.
So white folks need to A, say something, and B, talk to each other about racism. She's like, don't send me articles about racism. Send them to your other white friends.
Right.
Yeah.
It's important to know that, we can solve this amongst ourselves. I don't want to rely on my, my Black friends to teach me how to do it.
Yeah, right.
What is your ideal for a utopian society? If we could solve the issues, what would the issues be that we've solved? And what could that look like? And I mean, it's totally hypothetical, but is it possible? Do you reckon we have the capability of transforming in this way?
Adrienne Maree Brown, who wrote Emergent Strategy, a woman of color, Black woman, and pleasure activism, and does a huge body of amazing work. She talks about social justice as science fiction.
You're right.
Right, that we're going to have to stretch our minds so far, and that it's like and that's what this work is. It's all about creativity. Like, how will we do things different, right? So if it's not like supremacy, if we want to have our hiring policies be different, like what do we do? How do we do that, right? We have to like really get creative and stretch our minds. And I actually don't know, maybe what we're going for is the absence of oppression. Maybe that's liberation. We're aiming ourselves at a fuzzy notion that no one's experienced yet, right? We haven't experienced a liberated world yet. I don't know if our colonized minds can even conceive of what's possible yet.
Yes.
Right? I mean, who knows?
But if you can and I can, right? If my friend